Gymnastics is supposed to be beautiful, but behind the glittery leotards and perfect landings lies a brutal truth. One wrong move can change everything. These athletes push their bodies to the edge, chasing perfection on beams just 4 inches wide, or swinging from uneven bars high above the mat. And sometimes, tragically, the sport they love turns deadly. These are the stories that shake us to our core, not just because of how these lives ended, but because they remind us how fragile even the strongest can be. He was just 18, and for most people his age, life is still beginning, full of hopes, choices, and bright, ambitious plans. But for Nuan Min Triet, a rising star in Vietnamese gymnastics, that future was stolen in a split second. On what should have been just another training day, Triet attempted a backflip. Not his first, not his last. At least that's what everyone assumed. But as he launched himself into the air and rotated through space like he had countless times before, something went horribly wrong. He landed directly on his head. The impact was catastrophic, and his arms and legs immediately stopped responding. Paralyzed from the neck down, Triet was rushed to Hanoi's E Hospital. Doctors performed emergency surgery, then transferred him to Bach Mai Hospital to begin what would become a long and heartbreaking battle for survival. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe on his own, and yet he wanted to live. "I really appreciate life. I want to keep living," he whispered after his second surgery, words that would haunt those around him. His coach, Major Hao Trung Lin, broke down recalling them. "It made me so emotional. He still had the will to fight, but willpower alone couldn't undo the damage." Despite round-the-clock care, Triet's condition worsened. In April, he was transferred to Thanh Nan Hospital, where he spent his final weeks surrounded by doctors, nurses, and a devastated family who never gave up hope. On May 9th, 2024, Nuan Min Triet quietly passed away. The silence that followed was deafening. He had been more than just a gymnast. He had been the heart of his family, the third of 4 siblings, yet the one holding everything together. His father, retired and working odd security jobs. His mother, battling cancer. His older brother, too sick to work. His youngest sister, only 5. Every month, Triet gave up his entire salary from training to help support them. A child should never have to carry that kind of weight, and yet he did it without complaint. His coaches described him as relentless, someone who trained harder than anyone else. Not for fame, but for the dream of one day representing Vietnam on the world stage. He'd started gymnastics at just 7 years old and worked his way into the national youth team by age 12. By the time he was 15, he had already swept national titles in the U12, U13, U14, and U15 categories. In 2022, he even brought home a bronze medal for the Army team at Vietnam's 9th National Sports Festival. And he wasn't done. He had plans. He was determined to age out of the youth ranks and fight for a spot on the senior national team. He was also weeks away from graduating high school. But all of that ended in a foam pit that was supposed to catch him. On November 10th, 2023, at the National Sports Training Center in Hanoi, while attempting 2 backflips, Triet fell into that pit. Only instead of bouncing back, his neck snapped under the weight of a miscalculated landing. It should have been safe. That's what everyone thought. But gymnastics doesn't always forgive. In the months that followed, as his body deteriorated and his family watched helplessly, Vietnam's sports community rallied. Donations were raised. The Vietnam Gymnastics Federation and Department of Sports made sure Triet had the best care possible. But no amount of support could undo what had been done. When Triet passed, his coach admitted that somewhere deep down, they had already prepared for this. "We knew the chances were slim, but it doesn't hurt any less," he said, voice cracking. He always fought harder in competition than he did in practice. That spirit, it never left him. More than 200 people gathered for Triet's funeral, because Triet's story isn't just about sport, it's about sacrifice. Christy Henrich was impossible to miss despite her size. At just 4'10" and 93 pounds, she moved with explosive power and surgical precision. Teammates called her E.T., not because she was strange, but because she was extra tough. In the late 1980s, she was one of the brightest stars in American gymnastics, a mainstay on the national team, and heartbreakingly close to the 1988 Olympic roster, missing the team by just 0.8 points. Gymnastics was her entire world, and for a while, that world embraced her. But the praise came with conditions. Her downfall didn't begin with an injury or a failed routine. It began with a single sentence. At an international meet in 1988, a judge made a casual remark. She needs to lose weight. It wasn't even said by a coach, but in a sport where appearance is inseparable from performance, the damage was immediate. That night, Christy asked her coach, Al Fong, a question that would haunt her. Am I fat? He told her no, but the doubt had already taken root. From there, the unraveling was silent. Food became the enemy. Meals were reduced to apples and lettuce, just enough to function, never enough to heal. Soon came purging, laxatives hidden in bags, binging followed by shame, endless running, even when her body was breaking down. Her fiancé, Bo Moreno, watched helplessly as she avoided eating entirely, refusing meals in front of him. What the world saw as discipline was, in reality, self-destruction. Precision turned inward. Doctors intervened. Hospitalizations followed. At one point, Christy was placed in a wheelchair simply to stop her from burning calories. Her gums bled. Her kidneys began to fail. IV lines were ripped out because she believed the fluids would make her gain weight. Still, she fought. Against doctors, against food, against herself. When she fractured a vertebra in 1989, she returned to competition just 3 months later and finished second at nationals. Her physical toughness was legendary. Her inner suffering remained hidden. By the early 1990s, her body could no longer keep up with her will. Routines fell apart. She withdrew mid-competition, exhausted and unstable. Eventually, she retired from gymnastics, but the illness stayed. Therapy came and went. Sometimes she resisted. Sometimes she spoke. In one breakthrough moment, she admitted the truth. It wasn't really about weight. It was about control, shame, and the terrifying belief that she would never be enough. On July 26, 1994, Christy Henrich died in a hospital room. She was 22 years old. She weighed less than 60 pounds. Her organs had failed. The gymnast, who once flew effortlessly across balance beams, had been consumed by an invisible disorder until her body could no longer survive it. Her death shook the gymnastics world. For years, the pressure to be thin had existed. Unspoken, normalized, brutal, Christy became its most devastating symbol. Olympic champion Kathy Rigby, who had faced eating disorders herself, summed it up painfully. You don't want to believe something like this can still happen with all we know. But it happened. Seminars followed. Policies were discussed. Coaches were told to watch for warning signs. Parents were urged to step in sooner. Yet one question never fully disappeared. Why wasn't it enough to save Christy? Why did no one stop it in time? After her death, her bright red Toyota sat untouched outside her family's home. The custom license plate read Gymnast, once a badge of pride. Now, a quiet reminder of what she gave to the sport and what the sport took from her. He was only 23, but already a national hero. Anton Malej had tasted Olympic glory, winning bronze in Amsterdam just 2 years earlier, and now stood poised to cement his place among the world's best. But in the summer of 1930, on a rainy day in Luxembourg, everything unraveled, quietly, fatally, and without warning. What was meant to be another step in a celebrated career turned into one of the darkest moments in gymnastics history. The World Championships that year, still known then as the International Tournament, had already begun under a cloud of uncertainty. Literally, rain had poured across Luxembourg, forcing organizers to relocate the competition from a proper stadium to a makeshift gym inside a nearby school. The decision was rushed, the setup wasn't ready, and the equipment fatally inadequate. But the show went on. Anton Malej, known affectionately as Tone, stepped onto the rings, an event he had trained for relentlessly, ever since joining the so-called movement as a teenager. His form was sharp, his rhythm strong, but as he dismounted from the rings, something went wrong. The landing mat beneath him, thin, poorly secured, far below competition standards, did nothing to absorb the impact. He collapsed in agony. No cameras, no medics rushing in with stretchers, just confusion, stunned silence, and then frantic whispers. He was taken to a local hospital in Luxembourg, but it was clear from the beginning this wasn't just a bad fall. It was his spine. The damage was irreversible. He lingered through the night, and on July 15th, 1930, Anton Malej died. Even in the face of that unimaginable loss, the competition continued. The Yugoslavian team, stunned and grieving, chose to compete anyway. Their teammate Josip Primožić went on to win the all-around. The team took third place, but the celebration was muted. What do medals mean when one of your own never made it back? It wasn't just bad luck. Fellow gymnast Edvard Antosevich, who had stood beside Mala on that 1928 Olympic podium, later spoke out. He blamed the rushed relocation, blamed the poor safety, blamed the negligence. After all, 2 Yugoslav athletes had fallen that day. Leon Stukelj slipped from the high bar and had to withdraw, but Anton never got the chance to recover. An investigation later confirmed the worst. The gym floor had been covered in thin, unsuitable mats. There had been no proper preparation, no margin for error. And in this sport, there is no margin for error. Back home in Ljubljana, the sorrow was overwhelming. His body arrived by train on July 18th. Tabor Hall, the heart of the Slovenian Sokol movement, became a shrine. More than 10,000 people came to say goodbye. Mourners lined the streets. His casket passed through Skofja Loka and onto Bohinjska Bistrica, where he was buried beneath the mountain skies of his childhood. His grave bears a bronze bust sculpted by Lojza Dolinar, a reminder that even legends fall, but some leave behind more than medals. Since 1970, an annual memorial competition has been held in his name. Streets in Ljubljana and Bohinjska Bistrica still carry his legacy. Anton Malej didn't die in war. He didn't die in battle. He died doing what he loved, in a competition that should have protected him.
Lady, she was the China Games gold medalist on this event. Huge vault.
Sang Lan wasn't just talented, she was dominant. Inside China's ruthless elite sports system, she stood out as something special, powerful, precise, and unshakably disciplined. By just 14 years old, she had captured every title at the Zhejiang Province Championships. By 17, she was one of China's most dangerous vaulters, a rising star with her sights fixed firmly on the world stage. The Olympics were within reach, not a dream, an expectation, and then everything collapsed. July 1998, New York City, the Goodwill Games. Sang was warming up for the vault final, performing a basic timer, a routine drill gymnasts repeat endlessly, often without conscious thought. She sprinted down the runway, hit the board, launched into the air, and never stood up again. She hit the mat hard, completely still, her eyes fixed on the blinding arena lights. She couldn't move. At first, the crowd didn't understand what they were seeing. Then panic set in. Medics rushed the floor as the arena fell into stunned silence. Sang was rushed to Nassau University Medical Center, where doctors performed emergency spinal realignment and cervical fusion surgery. The verdict was devastating and final. Her spinal cord had been irreparably damaged. Sang Lan, the teenager once expected to fly, was now paralyzed from the chest down. Her body was shattered. Her resolve was not. She remained in New York for nearly a year, enduring brutal rehabilitation at Mount Sinai Hospital. Recovery wasn't about returning to gymnastics. It was about learning how to exist in a body that no longer obeyed her. And all of it played out under a spotlight she never asked for. Famous visitors arrived, offering encouragement. Leonardo DiCaprio, Celine Dion, even Christopher Reeve, who understood paralysis better than most. On New Year's Eve, she was honored in Times Square, smiling for cameras while quietly enduring unimaginable pain. But behind that brave public image, anger simmered. Years later, Sang finally broke her silence. She insisted the accident wasn't a tragic fluke, it was negligence. According to her account, a coach from another team had walked into the vaulting area during her run and removed a critical safety mat moments before her takeoff. She said she reported this immediately, even while lying in a hospital bed. But officials dismissed her. They told her she was confused, that she had suffered brain trauma, that she didn't understand what had happened. She did. Sang accused the Chinese national gymnastics system of turning its back on her once she could no longer compete, of treating her as disposable the moment she stopped winning medals. And when she was finally old enough and strong enough to speak freely, she began preparing legal action against the event's organizers, not for compensation, but for accountability, for the truth to be acknowledged. Because Sang Lan's story didn't end with her injury. Back home, she became something far bigger than an athlete. She became a host of an Olympic-themed TV program. She carried the torch at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. She enrolled at Peking University, determined to be seen not as a tragedy, but as a full human being. She even trained for the Paralympics, setting her sights on table tennis.
Trevan Joslyn's mother Hannah arriving at the hearing with a hug for the teacher at the centre of the tragedy.
Shirley Naseby, who was running the gym class, said Trevan was enthusiastic and very confident, one of the better gymnasts in the group.
She was only 12, bright, joyful, full of spark, the kind of girl who walked into a room and made it warmer without even trying. Trevan Hope Joslyn wasn't just a student at Taverham High School in Norfolk. She was a presence, confident, kind, one of the better gymnasts in her class. No one expected that an ordinary day in gym class would be her last. It was March 12th, 2014. Just another PE session. A basic gymnastics lesson. Nothing extreme, nothing dangerous. Just kids being kids. Laughing, running, stretching across mats and equipment under the soft echo of bouncing sneakers in the school gym. Near the end of the class, students were allowed to pick their favorite apparatus. Trevan, ever eager, chose the pommel horse. She'd already done a few successful vaults. Everything looked fine. She ran up like she'd done a dozen times before. Graceful, determined. But this time, just as she leapt, her right foot caught the edge of the horse. It was a fraction of a second, a tiny misstep, but it was enough. Trevan tumbled forward, face down, hitting the mat hard. At first, it didn't look like a catastrophe. She landed almost in a recovery position. Students gathered. A few thought she'd just been winded. But as she lay there trying to move her lips, barely able to form words, the fear began to set in. Something wasn't right. The PE teacher rushed over. Staff called for help. The school's pastoral care supervisor, Lynn Hammond, began CPR. Everyone was trying, praying that it wasn't as bad as it looked. "You just want to believe a child is still breathing," Hammond later said, her voice shaking from the memory. But even as Trevan was rushed to Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, reality was already spiraling out of reach. Doctors confirmed what no one wanted to hear: a catastrophic hyperextension injury to the neck. Her spinal cord had been severely damaged. She fought for a week, but on March 19th, 2014, Trevan died. A bright young life extinguished, just like that. It wasn't supposed to happen. She was healthy, strong, but during the inquest, it came out that Trevan had a pre-existing neck condition, something that could have limited her ability to safely participate in high-impact sports like gymnastics. The school was aware of it, but somewhere someone missed a step. Due to an administrative oversight, not all staff had been told. Still, it wasn't negligence. It wasn't carelessness. Investigators found no evidence of wrongdoing, and chillingly, the injury she suffered would have been fatal, even in someone with a perfectly normal neck. No one was at fault, but that didn't make it any less tragic. The assistant head teacher who led the class, Shirley Naseby, remembered Trevan with tears and affection. She was confident, enthusiastic, one of the better gymnasts in the class. The last time she saw Trevan whole, she was smiling mid-run, ready to vault toward her future. And then, it was gone. Her parents didn't speak to the media after the inquest. How could they? What words could possibly exist for that kind of loss? But the school tried to keep her memory alive. A quiet garden was built in the school grounds, a cherry tree planted in her name. Head teacher Peter Ware said students and teachers still talk about her with warmth. "She always had a smile on her face," he said, eyes lowered. "She will be remembered with great fondness." In the end, Trevan's death was ruled accidental. But for anyone who's ever sent a child off to school believing they're safe, it didn't feel like just an accident. It felt like a hole ripped open in the fabric of an ordinary day, one that would never quite close.
New tonight, tragedy on a local college campus. A young gymnast has died after a freak accident during a routine practice. Melanie Coleman was a junior at Southern Connecticut State University.
Melanie Coleman was more than an accomplished gymnast. She was the kind of person who made those around her feel lighter just by being there. Grace followed her everywhere, not only in the gym but in her everyday life. As a junior at Southern Connecticut State University, she embodied everything people hope for in a student athlete. She was an all-state gymnast, a high school MVP, and an All-America Scholar athlete recognized by USA Gymnastics. Yet none of those titles truly captured who she was. She was a nursing student with a caregiver's heart, a youth coach who poured herself into the next generation, a teammate people leaned on, a daughter, a sister, a friend whose kindness never felt forced. Melanie had ambition, but even more than that, she had compassion. On November 8th, 2019, she arrived at New Era Gymnastics in Hamden, Connecticut, a place that felt like a second home. She had trained there for years. That day carried no pressure, no spotlight. It wasn't a meet or a qualification round, just a normal practice. Another step forward in a life defined by dedication. Then, in an instant, everything unraveled. Melanie was working the uneven bars, a familiar skill, a routine movement she had performed countless times before. Mid-swing, she lost her grip. There was no build-up, no chance to react. She fell. The impact was devastating. Coaches rushed to her side immediately, performing CPR as emergency services were called. She was taken to Yale New Haven Hospital, where doctors fought to save her. But the injury, a catastrophic spinal cord trauma, was too severe. 2 days later, on November 10, 2019, Melanie Coleman passed away. She was just 20 years old. The shock rippled through the gymnastics world. Fatal training accidents are extraordinarily rare, especially among experienced athletes. The uneven bars are beautiful and unforgiving, demanding absolute precision. One slip is all it takes. For Melanie, that single moment changed everything. Her team was left shattered. Head coach Mary Fredericks described her as sweet-spirited and relentlessly hardworking. Athletic director Jay Moran called the loss devastating. The owner of New Era Gymnastics, who had coached Melanie for nearly a decade, said the accident was unimaginable, something no one saw coming. Words felt insufficient. In the days that followed, grief poured in from everywhere. A GoFundMe created to support her family raised over $32,000 almost immediately. Friends organized meal trains. Strangers reached out with messages of love and heartbreak. Athletes from across the country shared her story. Melanie's loss was felt far beyond Connecticut, and even in sorrow, her impact only grew. Her death sparked difficult conversations throughout the gymnastics community. Officials confirmed that safety protocols had been followed and that the gym had a strong safety record. But questions remained. How could this happen? How can risks be reduced? What more can be done? Calls grew louder for stronger injury prevention measures, improved emergency readiness, enhanced padding, and certified medical professionals present at practices, not only competitions. Because Melanie's story proved that tragedy doesn't wait for a spotlight. It can strike during the quietest moments. More deeply, her loss forced reflection on the culture of the sport itself, the constant push for perfection, the normalization of risk, the expectation that athletes endure without complaint. A sport that celebrates excellence must also protect the people who give it everything. Melanie's family chose to honor her in the most meaningful way possible. Scholarships were created in her name, ensuring her love for learning and athletics would continue to open doors for others. Her legacy now lives on in classrooms, gyms, and in conversations about athlete safety. Melanie Coleman is not remembered for the moment she fell. She is remembered for her kindness, her dedication, her heart, and for the lasting impact she continues to have long after the gym lights went dark.
Over on the vault, with 6 difficulty barrier. Mario Marchetti scores 14.333 for parallel bars. The next performer of the United States of America is Asha Hong.
He was only 23 years old, yet already a national icon. Anton Malej had stood on the Olympic podium in Amsterdam just 2 years earlier, claiming a bronze medal and earning the admiration of an entire nation. His future in gymnastics looked limitless. But in the summer of 1930, on a rain-soaked day in Luxembourg, that future ended suddenly, quietly, and forever. What should have been another milestone in a brilliant career became one of the most haunting tragedies the sport has ever known. That year's World Championships, then called the International Tournament, began under grim circumstances. Heavy rain flooded Luxembourg, forcing organizers to abandon the planned stadium and hastily move the competition into a school gymnasium nearby. The decision was rushed, the space was unprepared, and the equipment, as history would reveal, was dangerously inadequate. Still, the event went on. Anton Malej, known to friends and teammates as Tone, mounted the rings, an apparatus he had mastered through years of disciplined training with the so-called movement. His routine was controlled and powerful, but during the dismount, disaster struck. Beneath him, the landing area was poorly set. Thin mats laid over a hard floor, far below acceptable standards. When Malej hit the ground, the impact was devastating. There were no television cameras, no immediate medical response, just shock, confusion, and the growing realization that this was no ordinary fall. Malej was taken to a local hospital in Luxembourg, where doctors quickly understood the severity of his injuries. His spine had been critically damaged. Nothing could be done. He survived through the night. On July 15, 1930, Anton Malej died. Astonishingly, the competition continued. The Yugoslav team, shattered by grief, chose to carry on. His teammate Josip Primožić went on to win the all-around title, and the team placed third overall. But there was no real celebration. Victories felt hollow in the shadow of a teammate who would never return home. This was not simply bad luck. Fellow gymnast Edvard Antosievich, who had shared the Olympic podium with Malej in 1928, later spoke publicly about the conditions that day. He condemned the rushed relocation, the unsafe setup, and the lack of proper safeguards. 2 Yugoslav gymnasts had fallen during the competition. Leon Štukelj slipped from the high bar and was forced to withdraw. Anton Malej was not as fortunate. A later investigation confirmed what many feared. The gym floor had been covered with thin, unsuitable mats. The venue had not been properly prepared. Safety had been sacrificed to keep the event running. In gymnastics, where precision leaves no room for error, that failure proved fatal. When Malej's body was returned to Ljubljana by train on July 18th, the nation mourned. Tabor Hall, the center of the Slovenian Sokol movement, became a place of remembrance. More than 10,000 people gathered to pay their respects. Streets filled with mourners as his casket traveled through Škofja Loka and onward to Bohinjska Bistrica, where he was laid to rest beneath the mountains of his youth. His grave bears a bronze bust sculpted by Lojze Dolinar, a lasting tribute to a life cut short. Since 1970, an annual memorial competition has been held in his honor. Streets in Ljubljana and Bohinjska Bistrica still carry his name.
Trevan Joslyn's mother Hannah arriving at the hearing with a hug for the teacher at the centre of the tragedy.
Shirley Naseby, who was running the gym class, said Trevan was enthusiastic and very confident, one of the better gymnasts in the group.
She was only 12 years old, bright, cheerful, and full of life, the kind of child whose energy filled a room without effort. Trevan Hope. Joslyn wasn't just another student at Taverham High School in Norfolk. She was someone people noticed. Confident, kind, naturally athletic, one of the stronger gymnasts in her class. No one could have imagined that a routine school gym lesson would become the final moments of her life. March the 12th, 2014, began like any other school day. A standard PE class, a basic gymnastics session. Nothing extreme, nothing that raised alarms, just children laughing, moving between mats and equipment. The usual sounds of a school gym echoing around the room. Toward the end of the lesson, students were allowed to choose which apparatus they wanted to use. Trevan, enthusiastic as always, picked the pommel horse. She had already completed several clean vaults. Everything appeared normal. She ran toward the horse again, focused, confident, but this time, as she launched, her right foot clipped the edge. It happened in an instant. A tiny error. Trevan pitched forward and struck the mat face down. At first, it didn't look fatal. She wasn't twisted unnaturally. Some students assumed she'd just knocked the wind out of herself, but as seconds passed, fear crept in. Trevan struggled to speak. Her lips moved, but words wouldn't come. She couldn't get up. Staff rushed to her side. The PE teacher called for assistance. Pastoral care supervisor Lynn Hammond began CPR as panic spread through the gym. "You just want to believe a child is still breathing," Hammond later said, recalling the moment. Trevan was rushed to Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, but by then, the situation was already dire. Doctors delivered devastating news. Trevan had suffered a catastrophic hyperextension injury to her neck. Her spinal cord was critically damaged. She fought for days, but on March 19, 2014, 1 week after the fall, Trevan Hope Joslyn died. She was healthy, active, strong. Her death felt impossible. During the inquest, it emerged that Trevan had a pre-existing neck condition, one that could increase the risk of severe injury during high-impact activities like gymnastics. The school was aware of this condition, but But due to an administrative failure, not all staff had been informed. Still, investigators found no evidence of negligence or wrongdoing, and in a chilling conclusion, medical experts stated that the injury she sustained would likely have been fatal, even in someone with no underlying condition at all. No one was blamed, but nothing about it felt fair. Shirley Nosby, the assistant head teacher who led the class that day, spoke tearfully about Trevan. She was confident, enthusiastic, one of the better gymnasts, she said. The last memory she had of her was Trevan running toward the apparatus, smiling, determined, unaware that everything was about to end. Trevan's parents chose not to speak publicly after the inquest. Their silence said more than any statement could. At the school, her memory was honored quietly. A garden was created on the grounds, a cherry tree planted in her name. Head teacher Peter Ware said staff and students still speak of her with affection. She always had a smile, he said softly. She'll be remembered with great fondness. The official ruling called it an accident, but for any parent who has ever sent a child to school believing they would come home safe, it didn't feel like just an accident. It felt like an ordinary day that cracked open and never fully healed. It was just another summer day at the famed gymnastics school in Deva. Inside the gym, 12-year-old Alexandra Hooi was training quietly, alone, working through a wrist injury that had kept her from full routines. She was small, just 55 pounds, but already carried the weight of Romania's storied gymnastics legacy on her tiny shoulders. Everyone said she had that special spark, and she did, until the moment she didn't. That morning, nothing seemed out of place. Alexandra had been practicing in the pit, focused, determined. Then, without warning, she walked over to her coach, Liliana Kozma, and softly said she needed to go to the restroom. Minutes later, she returned pale, shaken, and whispered that she couldn't continue. She had just thrown up. Her coach didn't hesitate. They went straight to the school doctor. By then, something had already gone terribly wrong. The school's physician examined her and called an ambulance. Alexandra was still conscious when they loaded her in, at least that's what the doctor said, but the nurse who rode with her told a different story. She was already in a coma when we arrived, the nurse said later, her voice tight with disbelief. We asked if she had fallen, but were told no. The girl hadn't collapsed from a fall or an impact. Something inside her simply gave out. She was rushed from the pediatric hospital in Deva to the county hospital's ICU. Then, as her condition worsened, she was airlifted 43 minutes to the neurosurgery unit in Timisoara. Her tiny frame, now unconscious and unmoving, was kept alive by tubes and wires, surrounded by flowers and religious icons from strangers who had seen her on the news. Romania was watching. Night after night, her condition was broadcast across the country. Doctors worked urgently, running test after test, but their faces grew graver with each passing hour. A neurosurgeon finally confirmed what no one had suspected. It wasn't trauma. It wasn't from the gym. Alexandra had been living with a hidden congenital defect, a malformation of blood vessels deep in her brain. It had burst. A sudden brain hemorrhage, silent and swift, had robbed her of consciousness. They couldn't see the exact cause. All they knew was that her brain was flooding with blood and she had slipped into a third-degree coma. Time was slipping too. Back in her hometown of Roman, her parents didn't even know what had happened. They lived in a poor village near Faltitseni and didn't have a phone. By the time word finally reached them, their daughter had already spent hours fighting for her life. Alexandra Hooi had begun gymnastics at just 6 years old, full of raw energy and devotion. Like so many Romanian girls before her, she came from hardship and trained with quiet, relentless focus. She had recently been crowned national champion for her age group. She dreamed of following in the footsteps of her idols, the girls who had swept gold at Sydney in 2000. She talked about the Olympics constantly. I was very happy when Romania won, she said in an interview the year before, standing straight and serious between tumbling passes. I have no time for friends, but I like the gym. She was 12. For 5 days, she fought. The machines kept her breathing, but her light was slipping further away. And on August 20th, 2001, Alexandra died. She never fell. She never cried out. There was no dramatic crash, just a quiet whisper to her coach, a look in her eyes that said something wasn't right, and then nothing. Her story is still whispered in Romania, a little girl who trained with Olympic dreams and collapsed under the weight of something no one could see. No warning, no chance, just a silent defect that waited patiently for its moment.
Townsville was last month found guilty of breaches after the death of a 19-year-old gymnast in June last year. Michelle Matland fell and hit her head on a section of concrete.
June 18th, 2009, Townsville, Australia. The evening began like any other. 19-year-old Michelle Matland dashed out the front door for gymnastics practice, calling back to her mother, "Are we having that steak when I get home?" She never waited for an answer. She never came back. That was the last time her mother would hear her voice. Inside Aitkenvale Gym, the air thrummed with the familiar rhythm of training, feet hitting mats, bodies flipping, coaches shouting encouragement. But that night, a single overlooked detail would turn a normal session into tragedy. Michelle, determined and fearless, attempted a backward twisting layout, a move reserved for elite gymnasts. She launched herself into the air, rotating perfectly until the rotation went too far. Instead of landing safely on padded mats, she fell headfirst onto bare concrete. A section of the floor that should have been fully covered was left exposed, with only half the required padding. Her skull met the unforgiving surface with unimaginable force. Witnesses described the gym falling silent at the sound of impact. Coaches and teammates rushed to her side, but it was too late. Michelle was airlifted to Townsville General Hospital in critical condition. Her family clung to hope, praying for a miracle. By the next day, hope ran out. Michelle was gone. A daughter, a sister, a friend, a bright young woman whose joy and determination had drawn so many in, was lost in a way that could have been prevented. Investigations revealed shocking failures. The coach supervising her wasn't qualified to teach the skill she was attempting. Earlier in the day, someone had moved the mat and never replaced it properly. No one double-checked. No one intervened. Michelle's death was the horrifying result. Her mother, Ann Matland, later said her skull was smashed to smithereens. Words no parent should ever speak. The tragedy shook Queensland. A safety review of gymnastics facilities across the state revealed that only 8% had proper protections against hard surface contact. Numerous gyms were cited for unqualified staff, unsafe equipment, and poor planning. Michelle's death was not an isolated accident. It was a preventable disaster. Townsville Gymnastics was eventually fined $70,000 for breaching safety regulations. But no amount of money could restore what had been lost. Her mother called it bitter justice, noting that the safety measures introduced afterward could never bring her daughter back. "I wasn't expecting her not to come home," she said quietly, still grappling with the reality of the negligence that took her child. On what would have been Michelle's 22nd birthday, her family gathered outside the same gym, lighting candles in the dark. Each flame marked a young life cut short and served as a warning to athletes, parents, and coaches alike. Anne urged others, "Don't take the manager's word for it. Check for yourself." Michelle had returned to gymnastics not as an elite competitor, but as a young woman reigniting a passion. She wasn't chasing medals or fame. She just wanted to enjoy the sport she loved. Instead, her story became a chilling reminder of how quickly gymnastics can turn deadly and how one missing mat can change everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary summer morning at the legendary gymnastics school in Diva. Inside the quiet gym, 12-year-old Alexandra Hooi trained alone, carefully working around a wrist injury that had temporarily sidelined her from full routines. She was tiny, barely 55 pounds, but already carried the expectations of Romania's proud gymnastics tradition. Coaches said she had something special, a spark, and for a while she did. Nothing that morning felt unusual. Alexandra moved through the pit with focus and discipline, doing exactly what she'd been taught. Then, suddenly, she stopped. She walked over to her coach, Liliana Kozma, and softly said she needed to use the restroom. When she returned minutes later, her face had drained of color. She whispered that she couldn't keep training. She had vomited. Her coach didn't ignore it. They went immediately to the school doctor. By the time Alexandra was examined, it was clear this wasn't nerves or exhaustion. Something was very wrong. The doctor called for an ambulance right away. What happened next would later be disputed. The school physician said Alexandra was still conscious when paramedics arrived, but the nurse who accompanied her to the hospital remembered it differently. "She was already in a coma when we got there," the nurse said later. "We asked if she had fallen. They said no. There had been no slip, no crash, no impact. Her body had simply shut down from the inside. Alexandra was rushed first to the pediatric hospital in Deva, then transferred to the county hospital's intensive care unit. As her condition deteriorated, doctors ordered an emergency helicopter transfer, 43 minutes in the air to the neurosurgery unit in Timisoara. By then, her small body lay motionless, kept alive by machines. Flowers and religious icons surrounded her bed, left by strangers who had seen her face on the news. Across Romania, people watched the updates in silence. Doctors ran test after test, searching for answers. Finally, a neurosurgeon delivered the truth, one no one had expected. This wasn't caused by gymnastics. There was no injury. Alexandra had been born with a hidden congenital defect, an abnormal tangle of blood vessels deep in her brain. Without warning, it had ruptured. A massive brain hemorrhage. Sudden, violent, invisible. She was in a third-degree coma. Her brain swelling with blood doctors couldn't stop. Time was running out. Back in her hometown of Roman, Alexandra's parents knew nothing. They lived in poverty near Foltățeni and didn't own a phone. By the time the message reached them, their daughter had already been fighting for her life for hours. Alexandra had started gymnastics at just 6 years old. Like many Romanian champions before her, she came from hardship and trained with quiet determination. She had recently become a national champion in her age group. She idolized the Romanian team that dominated the Sydney 2000 Olympics and spoke endlessly about one day joining them. "I was very happy when Romania won," she said in an interview the year before. "I don't have time for friends. I like the gym." She was 12 years old. For 5 days she held on. Machines breathed for her. Doctors waited for signs that never came. And on August 20th, 2001, Alexandra Hooi died. There was no fall, no scream, no dramatic moment caught on tape, just a quiet request to her coach, a sudden sickness, and a condition no one knew existed. In Romania, her story still lingers, a child with Olympic dreams undone by something unseen. No warning, no second chance, just a silent flaw that waited patiently, then took everything. Samantha Curio seemed to embody balance in every sense of the word. A senior at Auburn University, she wasn't only an elite gymnast, she was an aerospace engineering student with a job offer waiting at Boeing. While many athletes chased medals and spotlight, Samantha chased precision, purpose, and a future far beyond the gym. On the floor, her movements were clean and controlled. Off it, she was disciplined, thoughtful, and deeply respected by teammates and coaches alike. Everything about her life suggested she was exactly where she was meant to be, until she wasn't. April 5th, 2019, the NCAA Regional Semifinals in Baton Rouge, one of the final meets of her career. The arena buzzed with excitement, music pumping, fans cheering, chalk hanging in the air. It felt routine, safe, familiar. Samantha stepped onto the floor with her usual calm focus. This routine wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was a closing chapter, a final contribution to her team after 18 years in the sport. Then came the tumbling pass, a double front flip. She under-rotated by a fraction of a second. The landing was catastrophic. Both knees buckled instantly. Tendons tore, knees dislocated. Samantha collapsed to the floor, screaming in pain as the music abruptly cut off. The arena fell silent. Teammates froze. Spectators gasped. Medical staff rushed in as she lay there, fully conscious, enduring agony few could imagine. Within hours, the footage was everywhere. Phone videos spread across social media, replayed millions of times. Slow motion, zoomed clips, comment sections filled with strangers analyzing the moment her career ended. For Samantha, the injury itself was only part of the trauma. Watching the internet turn her pain into content was something else entirely. "My pain is not your entertainment," she wrote on Twitter. Later, she explained in an interview, "You kind of want to watch it just to see what happens, but you don't think about the people it could impact." In that moment, she became something more than an injured athlete. She became a voice. Days later, Samantha posted a quiet but powerful message. "I am hanging up my grips and leaving the chalk behind." Her gymnastics career was over, not because she chose to quit, but because her body had reached its limit. Still, she refused to let that moment define her. Her new goal was simple, but deeply personal: to walk down the aisle at her wedding on her own 2 feet. The road back was brutal. Multiple surgeries, endless physical therapy, pain that lingered long after the headlines faded. But she kept going, and when the day finally came, she walked, smiling with every step. Samantha Curio's story didn't end with her injury. It forced uncomfortable questions. Why are high-risk skills still rewarded? Why does the sport push athletes to the edge of their bodies? And why does the public so easily forget that behind every routine is a human being? Her coach, Jeff Graba, later called that night one of the hardest of his career. But Samantha's response, measured, dignified, unflinching, became a lesson of its own. Because true grace isn't just about sticking the landing. Sometimes, it's about how you stand back up when everything falls apart.
Đấu của trước khi thi đấu hầu như luôn phát huy tốt hơn khi tập luyện. Trước khi qua đời, vận động viên thể dục dụng cụ Nuan Min Triet rất trân trọng cuộc sống và bày tỏ ước muốn thiết tha tiếp tục được sống.
He was only 18 years old, an age when most people are just beginning to imagine their future, weighing possibilities, dreaming big, believing there's plenty of time. For Nuan Min Triet, a gifted young gymnast from Vietnam, that future vanished in a single, devastating moment. It happened during what was supposed to be a routine training session. Triet attempted a backflip, something he had executed thousands of times before. This wasn't a risky new move or an experimental trick. It was familiar, controlled, trusted. But as his body rotated through the air, something went wrong. He came down head first. The impact was brutal. Instantly, Triet lost all feeling in his arms and legs. His body went still, unresponsive. He was rushed to E Hospital in Hanoi, where doctors performed emergency surgery before transferring him to Bach Mai Hospital. What followed was not recovery, but a long, painful fight to stay alive. Couldn't move. He couldn't breathe on his own. Machines kept his body functioning while his mind remained painfully aware of everything he had lost. And yet, he refused to give up. I really appreciate life. I want to keep living, Triet whispered after his second surgery. His words shattered everyone who heard them. His coach, Major Hao Trung Lin, later recalled breaking down as he spoke. He still had the will to fight, he said. That's what hurt the most. But determination couldn't repair a broken spine. Despite constant medical care, Triet's condition slowly deteriorated. In April, he was transferred to Than Nan Hospital, where his final weeks were spent under careful watch, his family never leaving his side, still clinging to hope that never came. On May 9th, 2024, Nuan Min Triet passed away quietly. What followed was an unbearable silence. Triet wasn't just a gymnast. He was the backbone of his family. The third of 4 children, he carried responsibilities far beyond his years. His father was retired, taking occasional security jobs. His mother was battling cancer. His older brother was too ill to work. His youngest sister was only 5 years old. Every month, Triet handed over his entire training stipend to help keep his family afloat. He never complained. He never asked for sympathy. Those who trained with him described him as tireless. He worked harder than anyone else, not chasing fame, but chasing a dream. He began gymnastics at just 7 years old. By 12, he had earned a place on Vietnam's national youth team. At 15, he dominated national championships, winning titles across the U12, U13, U14, and U15 divisions. In 2022, he added a bronze medal at the 9th National Sports Festival, competing for the Army team, and he was just getting started. Triet was determined to transition into the senior national team. He was weeks away from graduating high school. His future, once so clear, was finally within reach. Then came November 10th, 2023. At the National Sports Training Center in Hanoi, Triet was practicing 2 backflips into a foam pit, equipment designed specifically to prevent serious injury. But instead of cushioning his fall, the landing went catastrophically wrong. His neck took the full force of the impact. In a place meant for safety, everything collapsed. The gymnastics community across Vietnam rallied around him. Donations poured in. The Gymnastics Federation and Department of Sports ensured he received the best care possible. But no amount of support could reverse what had already happened. When Triet died, his coach admitted that part of them had been bracing for this outcome. "We knew the odds were low," he said, his voice shaking. "But knowing that doesn't make it easier. He always fought harder in competition than in training." that spirit never left him. More than 200 people attended his funeral.
Lady, she was the China Games gold medalist on this event. Huge vault.
She was already a star before most kids her age knew how to spell gymnastics. Sang Lan was a force in China's elite sports system, graceful, explosive, and disciplined beyond her years. By 14, she had swept every event at the Zhejiang Province Championships. By 17, she was one of China's most promising vaulters, eyes locked on the global stage. She didn't make it to the Olympics, but she was close, too close, and then everything changed. It was July 1998, New York City, the Goodwill Games. Sang was warming up for the vault final, a simple drill called a timer, the kind gymnasts do 1,000 times without thinking. She sprinted down the runway, planted her hands, launched, and never got up again. She landed hard, motionless, staring up at the arena lights, unable to move. Medics rushed in. A stunned silence fell over the gym. Spectators looked on, confused at first, then horrified. Sang was whisked to Nassau University Medical Center. Surgeons performed emergency spinal realignment and cervical fusion, but the truth came fast and cruel. The damage to her spinal cord was irreversible. Sang Lan, once destined to soar, was now paralyzed from the chest down. Her body was broken, but her spirit refused to be. Sang stayed in New York for nearly a year, undergoing grueling rehab at Mount Sinai. It wasn't just about learning how to live again. It was about staying seen in a world that had once celebrated her flips, but now didn't know what to say. Celebrities came. Leonardo DiCaprio, Celine Dion, even Superman himself, Christopher Reeve. They offered words of hope, but nothing could undo the fall. She was even honored in Times Square on New Year's Eve, smiling through unimaginable pain. But beneath that public grace, something darker lingered. Years later, Sang finally spoke out. She claimed her injury hadn't been a freak accident. It had been negligence. According to her, another team's coach had walked into the vaulting area mid-run and removed a crucial safety mat just before her takeoff. She says she told officials immediately, even from her hospital bed, but her voice was dismissed. They told her she was confused, that she had brain damage, that she should be quiet. Sang wasn't quiet. She accused the Chinese national gymnastics team of abandoning her after the accident, of discarding her like a broken doll once she could no longer win medals, and when she was finally old enough to stand up for herself, she began preparing to sue the event's organizers. Not for money, but for truth, because Sang Lan wasn't just another tragic sports story. She became something more powerful. Back in China, she transformed into a symbol, an advocate for disability rights, and a reminder that broken bones don't always mean broken spirits. A television miniseries was made about her. She hosted her own Olympic-themed TV show. She became a torchbearer for the 2008 Beijing Olympics and enrolled at Peking University, determined to live a full, visible life. She even trained for the Paralympics, hoping to represent her country in table tennis. And through it all, she fought. Against pain, against silence, against invisibility. She regained partial use of her arms. She kept doing therapy. She kept dreaming. Sang Lan never made it to the Olympic podium. But her story, raw, unfinished, painfully real, might be more powerful than any gold medal. Because she showed the world that while gymnastics may have taken her ability to walk, it never stole her voice. January 26, 2025, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Center City was alive with chaos and jubilation. Thousands of Eagles fans packed the streets, voices echoing off glass towers, fireworks cracking through the winter night. Green smoke swirled. Chants of "Fly, Eagles, fly" filled the air, and the city became a rolling wave of celebration. Among them was 18-year-old Tyler Sabapathy, a freshman at Temple University. Not just any student in the crowd, Tyler was a decorated gymnast. A prodigy with over 120 medals to his name. Fearless, disciplined, and full of promise, he embodied the energy of the night. At 15th and Market, adrenaline coursed through the crowd. Tyler's eyes caught a slick, condensation-covered light pole, already crowded with fans daring each other to climb. To most, it was a hazard. To Tyler, it was instinct. Years of gymnastics had honed his balance, strength, and aerial awareness. With the cheers of onlookers spurring him on, he scaled the pole with precision, arms gripping, legs securing, body moving like it was part of a routine. For a brief moment, the pole became his apparatus, the crowd his audience. Then, disaster struck. In a heartbeat, his grip slipped. The crowd's roar twisted into screams as Tyler fell, his body twisting midair before striking the unforgiving concrete below. His back hit hard, his head snapping with a force that drowned out the fireworks. The festive energy of the night collapsed into horror. Paramedics fought through the throng, sirens piercing the chaos, rushing him to Jefferson Hospital. Doctors worked frantically, but the injuries were catastrophic. His brain trauma left no room for recovery. On January 28th, Tyler Sabapathy passed away, just 18 years old. Temple University's president mourned him, saying, "The loss of a promising young man like Tyler is both tragic and traumatic. Words cannot capture this sorrow." Tyler was admired not only for his athletic talent, but also for his relentless drive, his self-discipline, and his bright, unshakable spirit. Professors saw a future leader. Teammates remembered his grit, laughter, and unmatched work ethic. His family remembered the boy who left Toronto with dreams in his eyes, only to be taken far too soon. Footage from that night still circulates online, fans climbing poles, fireworks illuminating the skyline, the city lost in celebration. For strangers, it's a moment of revelry. For those who knew Tyler, it is unbearable. Because that night, the triumph Philadelphia celebrated became the night a young gymnast fell forever. A boy who had soared higher than most, grounded in an instant by one fatal slip.